How do you get power and never lose it? Let's say you are a wealthy member of American high society. You stay close to prominent media figures, you're friends with other billionaires, and you pay politicians to effectively do your bidding. What if the politicians that you're funding say no to your requests? You've lost power. But what if I told you that there's another way to control your pawns? What if you could get photos and videos of these people doing unthinkable evil acts? Maybe they have an uncontrollable vice or just an insatiable lust that you can exploit. Or maybe they were at that party and they just didn't know that that one girl was underage. Too late. Welcome to the dark world of political extortion. Jeffrey Epstein, the Franklin scandal, and P Diddy are three of just many alleged blackmailing operations that have happened within the United States. But who's controlled and who's really controlling? Well, today, we're gonna figure it all out. That's right, I've invited my good friend Nick Bryant, the guy who literally published Epstein's Black Book onto the internet and the lead journalist on all things dirty politics. Today, we're going through all the important names, the evil deeds of ritual abuse, and who's really pulling the strings. So, sit back, relax, and welcome to camp. What's up, everybody, and welcome back to camp. Today, we are talking about an interesting topic, something that a comedian definitely should be talking about. And I was doing a lot of research on this specific thing. There's Jeffrey Epstein kind of opened up, I think, a social thought bubble about this type of crime, things related to underage trafficking, specifically for the means of extortion or political blackmail. And in doing my research, I came across a very interesting book called The Franklin Scandal, written by a guy named Nick Bryant, who happens to be sitting right across from me. How are you, Nick?
I'm good. Good to be with you.
Yeah, I'm really excited to speak with you. You have a very fascinating life. You've done a lot of really interesting research. You, for lack of a better word, you basically published Jeffrey Epstein's Black Book onto the internet.
I literally published Jeffrey Epstein's Black Book on the internet.
So if there was a guy to talk to about political extortion schemes and these dirty deeds as it involves, large power brokers in America and around the world, I think you'd be the guy to talk to.
I'm in the top 1%.
I would say so. Yeah. Maybe 0.01%. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
You're not a billionaire. You know what I mean? You're not.
I'm not.
You weren't an accomplice of Epstein's, right?
Well, I'd be living in a much nicer apartment if I was an accomplice of Jeffrey Epstein.
Yeah, you wouldn't be in a 10 with me. But today I really am interested in speaking about two specific cases. Everything related to Jeffrey Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell, her family, his family, the people that were involved, Lex Wexner, the people that were benefiting from these, trafficking operations. And I also want to speak about a case known as the Franklin scandal. The Franklin scandal, I think, is a little bit lesser known, but basically, parallels the Epstein case almost exactly.
They're carbon copies.
Yeah.
Almost.
And I think it's important to discuss them in tandem because I think that a lot of people look at Epstein and they say, oh, this is a little bit weird. There's some weird things going on. Even if you don't accept, all of the conspiratorial nature of the things involving Epstein, which we'll get into. I think most people look at it and it's kind of become a meme like, oh, Epstein didn't kill himself. That's like sort of the phrase and the terminology that people use. And so I think a lot of people have questions about that. And so we're going to get to that. But I want to talk about the Franklin scandal because I think it's lesser known and I think, equally as disturbing. And you wrote the book, The Franklin Scandal, which is an excellent book that details everything so thorough. I mean, it was basically you and the journalist that was actually doing the work in the 80s on the case. He eventually died in a plane crash.
Actually, he was an investigator.
Oh, an investigator.
For the Nebraska State Senate.
And I would say you two are probably the two most qualified people to discuss this. So I'm curious, could you just give me just an outline for the lay people to get them up to speed? What was the Franklin scandal? When did it happen, and who are the main people that were involved?
The Franklin scandal is about a nationwide network, very much like Jeffrey Epstein's. The epicenter was in Omaha, Nebraska. And there were two primary pimps. One was Lawrence E. King, and one was Craig Spence. Craig Spence was in Washington, D.C., and King was in Omaha. And King was getting lots of children from Boys Town, the distinguished Catholic orphanage on the outskirts of Omaha. And then these guys, predators like Epstein or King or Spence, they know how to get kids. They know where to get kids. Super predators know how to prey. So King was flying kids, and I've got about 200 flight receipts. And he was flying kids from coast to coast. And most of the flight receipts that I have are passenger manifests go to Washington, D.C. And in Washington, D.C., there was a party house run by a power broker named Craig Spence, who had connections to Mount Olympus. This guy was as plugged in as someone can be in Washington, D.C.
And who was this guy?
He was a lobbyist, and he was also, I believe, a compromise. He's also a CIA asset. And King would bring the kids, a lot of times, King would bring the kids to Spence's home, his mansion in the Calorama section of Washington, D.C. And it was wired for audiovisual blackmail, just like Epstein's homes. So any of the politicians or power brokers that stayed there and wanted to party, they would ultimately be compromised by Craig Spence or this. I mean, you can say CIA, but it's some dark, malignant corner of intelligence.
Okay. Now, I want to just clear up a couple of things because as I was doing research, there were some things that I found a little confusing. So it's called the Franklin scandal because it came out of the Franklin Credit Union in Omaha, Nebraska. Now, there's two crimes that are happening simultaneously. There's a financial crime, and then there's also this trafficking crime. And in, I guess, full transparency with the official narrative says that the trafficking amongst a grand jury was a hoax.
Actually, two grand juries.
Two grand juries.
Yeah.
They say that element was a hoax, but the financial crimes, they were legitimate and that he defrauded people of millions of dollars. So it's called the Franklin scandal because of this credit union.
The Franklin Credit Union. Yeah.
He was, what was he doing with the Franklin Credit Union? This guy, King. What's up, guys? We're going to take a break really quick because I want to tell you about S'more Camp. Yes, join S'more Camp. What is this? This is the inner sanctum. This is for the diehard camp folk, all right? This is not just for your regular camp listener. If you listen to a couple episodes here and there, I appreciate you, but this is not for you, all right? This is for the diehard campers. Sign up, put your email in, and you're going to be getting weekly updates about what's coming out next on the show, exclusive merch updates that will be coming out very soon. And furthermore, you'll be getting interesting facts and little things that go into the research for this show that didn't make the episode because maybe it was a little too crazy, maybe it was a little too dark. You can check it out all there, straight to your inbox. It's very easy. The link is in the description. Join the inner sanctum of the real campers, the real diehards, all right? The real people that mess with this show. It's awesome. I enjoy it. I enjoy putting it together. Check it out in the description. Well, let's get back to the show.
Lawrence King, he was a Republican power broker. He even sang the national anthem at the 1984 Republican convention. He's a very good singer, a very evil man, but a
good singer.
But a very good singer. Yeah. And
R. Kelly's a good singer.
It's so with King, he used the Franklin Credit Union as basically a boiler room. And he was able to embezzle about $40 million. And if you're a federally insured credit union, you have to be audited at least once a year by the feds. And the feds hadn't audited the Franklin Credit Union in 4 years. And then all of a sudden, it's raided and $40 million is missing. So a number of Nebraska senators formed what was called the Franklin Committee to look into the embezzlement. But after they came together, people from social services approached them. And they said, King is a thief, but he's also running a nationwide trafficking network. And they had reports about King that they'd given to both state and federal law enforcement, and they were simply ignored. So they wanted the social service personnel wanted the senators to look into the child trafficking too, which they did.
So how does this work? Someone like King, he's moving his way up the ranks of, Republican politics. And then he somehow is now, and the embezzlement thing makes sense, right? People like to steal. And if you're in a position where you're unchecked, you're going to steal, sure. But how do you get into a position where you are now procuring children and then sending them to other high power people? Are they putting a known in that position to do that? Or was he compromised and then had to do it? What do you think happened?
King is
Mm-hmm.
I've got no doubts about that. My theory is, and this is just my theory, if you read the Franklin scandal, I prove much of the Franklin scandal was sealed grand jury testimony and sealed grand jury exhibits. And it's about as solid a book as a book can be as far as research. But I'm just extrapolating here. Both King and his partner, Craig Spence, they were both in Southeast Asia at the same time. King was in Thailand with a top secret clearance, and Craig Spence was an ABC war correspondent. And when they both, and they're both from working class families, much like Epstein, who we'll get into later. They're both from working class families. And they were both, and what I think happened, I think that they probably got busted in Southeast Asia in little boys. And that's where they returned. Because once they came back to the U.S., their careers just skyrocketed exponentially.
And why is King in Southeast Asia with top clearance? Was he military?
He was ostensibly with the Air Force. Yeah.
Okay. So this is a guy from a working class family, gets in the Air Force. Goes to Southeast Asia. It's a boy. He gets caught. And then basically, and then again, this is conjecture and pure allegation, that he was, that they say, hey, we'll give you a deal. How about you can go back? And he's like, oh, but I have a career in politics. I want to do X, Y, Z. And they say, how about you can work for us as an asset and you'll avoid jail time. And you'll live a good life.
And you'll be able to as many kids as you want. I mean, that was the deal that was made, I believe, with King. I believe it was made with Spence. And I believe that it was made with Jeffrey Epstein, too.
And where do you think these deals come from? Is this high brass in intelligence, U.S. government? There's
some dark, malignant corner of our intelligence that blackmails people. I mean, that's just how political blackmail is as old as politics itself.
Right.
Alexander Hamilton, there's been a number of hagiographies written about, like, the founding fathers that give them saint-like status. But Alexander Hamilton was having an affair with a 23-year-old woman who was married.
Mm-hmm.
And her husband was blackmailing him. And there was a muckraking journalist who outed Alexander Hamilton, and Jefferson had become president, and Jefferson and Hamilton had tremendous antipathy towards each other. So the muckraking journalist felt that Jefferson would give him an appointment in his administration. And when Jefferson didn't do that, the muckraking journalist outed him for having sex with one of his slaves, Sally Hemings. And actually, DNA has shown that they had progeny, and that. So when we get into political blackmail, it's something that's age old. It's not something that's just new.
Right. And the idea of, child trafficking would make sense in this regard because, maybe you could use, being gay right back in like the, 60s, 70s, 80s, even in the 90s. And like we have evidence, like the mafia would control gay bars in order to get politicians to do their bidding, et cetera. So these things are more or less documented. But now, obviously being gay rightfully is, not an issue socially, or not as much of an issue.
Generally not an issue, but it can be.
Sure. I guess if you're being fraudulent about it, it would be a problem.
Yeah. I mean, if you're like Peter Thiel and you're completely in the closet and Gawker outs you.
Right. Yeah. You shouldn't be outed. I mean, that's a nefarious thing to do to someone, but it's not a career ender.
It couldn't happen to a nicer guy, though, Peter Thiel.
It was, I guess, back in the day, you would lose your career. But something like, engaging in sex or, I guess with an underage person, there's no coming back from that. It is the worst of all evil. So if you can get someone doing this, then you can control them, into perpetuity.
I was able to get a hold of I was able to spend some time with one of the blackmail photographers for the Franklin scandal. And they were somewhat unctuous. I mean, that vocation is not forged with integrity.
Mm-hmm.
But I got to know him, and
this is Rusty Nelson.
His name is Rusty Nelson, and I asked him, "How does this work?" Because I was trying to get my mind around it. It was so big, and I was trying to just see. And he said to me, and I've used this analogy many times. He said, "Once you're compromised, it's like you're on a yacht, and it's a beautiful yacht, and it's a beautiful day, and you can have anything you want if you're on the yacht. But if you decide to get off the yacht, the people on the yacht are going to make sure that you drown.
Yeah.
So that's how it works. There's zero incentive for anybody to get off the yacht.
That makes sense. Now, this dark, malignant intelligence committee that's sort of basically getting blackmail on people, do you think that it belongs to one specific branch of the government? Is it just a shadowy sort of cabal that exists within the government? Is it named? Is it an operation? Is there some type of label to put on it?
You know, some people call it the deep state. Some people call it the military intelligence complex. I call it generally a dark, malignant corner of intelligence. Herbert Hoover blackmailed people forever. I mean, he had files on everybody. People were frightened of J. Edgar Hoover. And
do you have an example of one of those?
I mean, he had files on Frank Sinatra. He had files on JFK. He had files on RFK. I mean, he had files on just about everybody that he didn't like. And even people that he liked, he had files on. So with him, he was blackmailing people for years. And according to Evelyn Lincoln, who was JFK's secretary, and people dispute this, but according to her, Kennedy did not want Johnson on the ticket in 1960 when he ran for president. But Hoover blackmailed him into taking Johnson on.
And was going to expose one of his affairs or something?
JFK had a lot to expose.
Yeah.
Now, some people say that that's true. Some people say it's not. But it's entirely possible. Given the dynamics of JFK and given the dynamics of J. Edgar Hoover, I think it's entirely possible.
Well, as I understand, I mean, JFK seems to have he's a philanderer and likes women. And I think he has confirmed relationships with Marilyn Monroe, Judy Campbell, and, a litany of others.
People, yeah.
So that coming out, especially in that time in the 60s, would have been, a death sentence for his career. That makes a lot of sense. So this guy, Lawrence King, gets this deal, and they basically say, okay, we're going to put you into political office. We're going to put you with this credit union. What do you think happens from there? Again, this is conjecture, but just trying to paint the picture.
He all of a sudden starts to run this credit union that's for lower socioeconomic people in northern Omaha. But then he starts driving really expensive sports cars. He starts living in really expensive homes. He has a penthouse in like a luxury apartment building in Omaha. He has a number of apartments. He's flying to Washington, D.C. just about every week. And that credit union is supposed to have $2.5 million in it. And his salary is supposed to be $20,000 a year. So
interesting.
So he was given carte blanche to do whatever he wanted. And when these social service people came to those senators and said, King is trafficking children, they gave the senators reports that they had, that they'd also given to federal and state law enforcement that had been ignored. So the Senate committee started looking at that, and they hired an amazing investigator named Gary Caradori. And he was like, I've got everything that Gary Caradori got. I've got his daily logs. I've got the flight receipts that he found. I got his interviews. I mean, I got everything that Gary Caradori had. And he was an amazing investigator. And he was actually, and the FBI was working very, very hard to cover this up. Just like we've seen the Department of Justice cover up Epstein. If victims came forward to Caradori, the FBI immediately put heat on them. And that's thoroughly documented. And actually, there was a perpetrator that wanted to do a deal with the senators because they had him dead to rights. And the FBI, according to an affidavit that I had, the FBI threatened to kill him if he didn't keep his head low.
Well, and how do those threats come in? Is it written in choice words, or is it like, hey, we're going to take you out?
With the Franklin scandal, these FBI agents were really dirty, and there wasn't there wasn't much diplomacy going on there.
And they get a tip from some higher brass that says, hey, this guy's actually an asset. Leave him alone. Is that kind of why the cover-up happens?
The FBI, there were some agents in the FBI that were told to cover this up.
Got it.
To make sure that, because with the Franklin scandal, if the dominoes had started to fall in Omaha, they would have fallen all the way to Washington, D.C. So there were people very high in the government, in the Department of Justice, that said this has to be covered up.
So Caradori's investigation, what does he ultimately uncover? What are some of the main kind of smoking gun moments that he finds?
Caradori finds other victims than the ones that originally came forward, and he videotapes them. And he's a dynamo. I've got his leads list that has approximately 60 victims. It has 325 people that are involved in Franklin one way or the other. But his leads list has 60 victims. And my job was to find these victims and get them to talk to me. That was really difficult because some of them, this system becomes, it's an amazing system. You get a kid that's really young. You repeatedly turn them on to drugs. And then at a certain point, they lose their youthful marketability, and then they're just expunged. So you end up with a young adult that's probably a drug addict or an alcoholic.
Likely has mental health issues.
Big time mental health issues. And they go on to commit crimes and compromise their own credibility. Or they have a lot of psychiatric problems that compromise their own credibility.
And then their testimonies can sort of be thrown out.
Yeah. So with the Franklin scandal, there were 6 victims that came forward. Caradori got 4 to come forward, and there were 2 others that came forward. And there were 2 grand juries. There was a state grand jury and there was a federal grand jury. The state grand jury, and I don't know if your viewers or listeners are familiar with how grand juries work, but they're very easy to corrupt. There was a New York state judge that said special prosecutors of grand juries have so much power over grand jurors that they could get them to indict a ham sandwich.
What is the difference between a grand jury and a regular jury?
Okay, so with a grand jury, a special prosecutor is chosen. And grand jurors, when we think of a grand jury, we think it's like a decree from the guise of jurisprudence.
Yeah, it sounds like a greater deal than a regular jury.
But with a grand jury, grand jurors are just people that have shown up for jury duty, and they've been funneled to a grand jury. And a special prosecutor is chosen, and these are just citizens. They don't know anything about this case. And the special prosecutor is responsible for calling witnesses and then showing the grand jurors evidence. So essentially, what the special prosecutor wants, the special prosecutor gets. In the Epstein grand jury, I dissected it on a podcast of mine a couple weeks ago. And I show just how corrupt that grand jury was. Because in the Epstein case, the Palm Beach Police Department had the statements of 5 victims, but they knew of 17 others. So there were 23 victims. And the woman, the special prosecutor was Lana Belilovic. She called 2 minors. That was it. Just 2, and then skewered them. And they called them prostitutes. And one of them had been by Jeffrey Epstein when she was 14 years old, and she was 16 years old at that time. So that grand jury declared that Jeffrey Epstein hadn't a single minor. So that was, and the grand jury in Omaha, the state grand jury, declared that Lawrence King hadn't a single minor, nor the cadre of around him. And the federal grand jury also declared that. And then there were a couple of kids, and I don't know how they did this, but it's pretty amazing given all the abuse that they endured. They wouldn't recant. The FBI and Department of Justice coming down on them really hard. They wouldn't recant. One of them was Alicia Owen, and she had been trafficked since she was an adolescent. And she would not recant her abuse. And she was indicted on 8 counts of perjury from the state grand jury and 8 counts of perjury from the federal grand jury. She was looking at 200 years in prison. We're talking, at this point, she's 21 years old. We're talking about a 21-year-old looking at 200 years in prison.
For being the victim of a
For
crime.
saying I was abused and I'm not going to say I wasn't abused.
And so what is the perjury on the grounds of? That the grand jury found no malfeasance on King's part?
Yes, that she lied.
So therefore she must be lying.
She said that she was trafficked by King. She was repeatedly by the Omaha police chief, and that she saw the publisher of the Omaha World Herald, which is the big magazine in Nebraska, 8 or 9-year-olds. So not only was it to protect that cadre of power, but it was also to protect the Washington, D.C. side, where Craig Spence was using these kids to compromise bigger fish.
Now, the element to the Omaha scandal, I guess actually a question I have regarding Omaha specifically, why was it Omaha? Is that where King was from? Or is that a place where they could get along with their abuse and not be found out as easily?
This is interesting. Stratcom is the brain of our national defense system. And it's in Omaha, it's outside of Omaha, Nebraska. And according to sources that I have, Stratcom, I mean, that's where Bush was taken right after 9/11. And I believe that that's where he met Warren Buffett.
That's where who met Warren Buffett?
Where Bush Jr. met Warren Buffett. That they were both taken to Stratcom during 9/11. Stratcom is the brain of our national defense, and there's a high concentration of CIA people in that area because of Stratcom. They have to keep that area clean. And I think, now, I've seen various municipalities let walk. We saw it with Epstein, but the snow killings is about a network outside of Detroit, which we can get into later. And the very popular docuseries, The Keepers, was about a network in Baltimore that, and both these networks had connections to law enforcement. And the Franklin network, I mean, they were pandering kids to the police chief.
Now, who was it? Charles Manson was at Boys Town at a certain time.
Briefly there. That's what the lore is. I haven't been able to nail that down, but yeah, that's.
Is that a strange coincidence to you, or do you think that there's another layer to that makes it more interesting?
I have no idea.
It is peculiar that he happens to be at the same orphanage.
Well, Steve McQueen was there too. So,
oh, interesting.
So who knows?
Right. So let's say I'm with you. I'm like, okay, there's definitely, money, financial crimes. That's documented for sure. We have all of these victims coming forward that, under heavy scrutiny, still maintain that there was sexual misconduct, sex trafficking. Now, the element that I guess is probably the most pivotal here is this idea of blackmail and political extortion. Now, how do we know that in this whole operation that there was political extortion, specifically in Washington, D.C.? What evidence is there of that?
There's a tremendous amount of evidence. The Washington Times ran a number of articles on the blackmail that was going down at Craig Spence's home. Craig Spence had a house that was wired for audiovisual blackmail. I wrote a book called Confessions of a D.C. Madam, The Politics of Sex, Lies, and Blackmail. And it was from the perspective of Henry Vincent. He ran a gay escort service. And he would provide King and Spence with escorts, with gay escorts. And Henry describes this afternoon where Spence summons him, because Spence was this almighty power broker, and he would summon Henry. And Spence, and we're talking mid-1980s, gave Henry up to $25,000 a month for male escorts. So he was using a lot of escorts. But Henry is summoned, and he sees King and Spence, and both these guys are malevolent. They're evil creatures. And King is talking about sadism with children, and they're talking about how much power they have and blah, 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 blah. And Henry is from West Virginia, very naive guy, and he's a mortician. He is the last guy that you would expect to run a gay escort service. With Henry, it's kind of interesting. He went to, he comes from a background in West Virginia where people are, getting bit with snakes and stuff like that, poisonous snakes, because of there's a passage in Mark where if you have faith in Christ, you can speak in tongues and withstand the poison of snakes or poisonous snakes. I don't think that passage, it's kind of tacked on. I don't think that passage was added to like the 5th or 6th century, but nonetheless, there have been a lot of snake handlers in Appalachia that have been killed because of that passage.
Wow.
So Henry comes from that kind of background where, he was young and gay and he was repressed. And then he met some other morticians, gay morticians, and they would go to this is Chippendale's version of like a gay scene. And Henry met one of the dancers and kind of befriended him. And the dancers said that this guy who was dying was willing to sell his escort service. And Henry, just kind of on a lark, said, well, how much? And the guy said, I think it was 10 or 13,000, something like that. And Henry said, I'll buy it.
Wow. So he gets into snake handling too.
No.
Just in a different way.
But Henry is a very, very, very smart guy.
Mm-hmm.
And then, so he opens the Washington Yellow Pages. This is back when we had Yellow Pages. And then he starts calling escort services. And most escort services are fly-by-night operations, so they don't pay their phone bill. So when Henry would encounter a phone, like a disconnection notice, he would call the phone company and say, I will pay the arrears if you give me the number. So Henry grew this little escort service into a huge escort service.
In Washington, D.C.
In Washington, D.C. He's there with King and Spence, and they've got like a little sugar bowl of Coke, and Spence is doing Coke. And Spence has seismic narcissism. I mean, if we're talking on a scale of 1 to 10 as far as seismic narcissism, he's probably a 12. So all of a sudden, Spence starts asking Henry about his life. And Henry thinks that he's witnessing like the Red Sea parting. I mean, Spence has only cared about his hookers and treated him like shit. So Spence starts asking about his life and where he grew up and what college he went to study mortuary sciences. And then he starts asking about his escort service and how much he makes and how many escorts he has. And then King is sitting there with a malignant smirk. And at a certain point, Spence gets up and signals to Henry to follow him. He goes into a closet, and at the back of the closet, there's a secret panel. And then he opens the secret panel, and there's a big two-way mirror that's in the living room, that's facing the living room. But then there's all these monitors. And then he hits a couple of the monitors, or one of the buttons on the monitors, and Henry is talking about his escort service. And Spence essentially says, I blackmail people for a living, and consider yourself blackmailed. So, and there's other accounts.
And how do we know that case? Like, where did that anecdote come from?
That comes from Henry.
Wow.
In the book we wrote.
Hey, what's up, guys? We're going to take a break really quick because I want to talk to you about the largest independently owned daily fantasy sports platform in North America. Yes, we are talking about Prizepicks. This is a super fun fantasy game that will help you make some money while you're watching sports and make the games more interesting. Unless you're me, which I've lost every time. Don't. I'm not good at this game. I don't know sports. Okay. I don't know how to play, but maybe you do know how to play. And if you are interested in learning how to play, it's real easy. You just pick more or less on like 2 to 6 player stat projections. And if you guess properly, you're going to see the winnings roll right in. I mean, who do we got? We got Devonta Smith, 74.5 receiving yards. You saying more or less? Me? I'm going more. I don't know anything about this. I'm going to say more. How about this? I think this is e-gaming. CS2. Is that on? I'm saying chop, 2.85, maps 1 to 2 kills. Who knows what that means? I'm going with less. See, it's that easy to play. And maybe I'll see some winnings roll in. If you're interested in checking out Prizepicks, here's what I recommend you do is go to prizepicks.com/camp. Go to prizepicks.com/camp. That's right. Use the promo code CAMP. And for listeners of this show, here's how it works. You sign up using the promo code, deposit and place your first lineup, and $50 in promo funds will appear in your account instantly. That's right. When you play your first $5 lineup, you don't even need to win your lineup to receive a $50 bonus. So even if you lose like me, you can keep on playing. Prizepicks.com/camp. Check it out. Let's get back to the show. And so now, like, what happens to all this footage? Like, all of these politicians are getting blackmailed. And I also want to know kind of who and which politicians get blackmailed. But this seems like that would be very clear evidence, right? Like, you have a wiretap AV system inside your home with two-way mirror or one-way mirrors. What happens to all of that equipment? Is that brought up in the trial?
Well, look at Epstein. The FBI drilled Epstein's safe and took out hundreds to thousands of DVDs.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of them were, but a number of them were probably blackmail material. And what's happened to them?
Yeah, I mean,
nothing's happened to them. And I've filed 2 Freedom of Information requests, not for the DVDs, but for reports on the DVDs. After Epstein died, the Fed said his case was closed. So I filed my FOIAs and I just wanted reports on the DVDs. And then I was told that the case was ongoing. And then like 6 months later, I filed a FOIA and I was told that the case was ongoing. So they're never, ever I mean, and that's where this stuff goes. I mean, it ends up in a black hole.
But the Franklin case specifically, like, was that ever brought up in the trial? Like, oh, there's,
No.
That was never.
No, it never went that far.
Wow. And so which politicians get compromised and how exactly does a politician get compromised, right? Like what, like, I'm assuming not all these guys are, so like, how does that happen?
In December, Tennessee Representative Tim Burchett did something unbelievably courageous. He said that a lot of my colleagues are being compromised in honey traps.
Oh, he said this.
A U.S. congressman said it in December.
And can you explain a honey trap for anyone that doesn't know?
A honey trap is where people get compromised sexually.
Right.
A U.S. Congress. I've been in this world for 22 years, man, and I've been waiting for a representative. Now, there was another guy that had said that, but he clearly had some problems. So he lacks credibility. But this guy, he said it, and he's still in the House of Representatives. So he's got to be squeaky clean.
So you Lawrence King is in D.C. He invites you to a party at Spence's house, and you go over there, and there's young people. Does he say explicitly?
This is how it works. Okay, so there's the straight up parties where everybody's on the yacht that's invited, but then there's the parties where it's like a political, it's kind of like your Washington, D.C. party. And people are getting lubricated with alcohol, talking about politics or whatever people do in Washington, D.C. And then at a certain point, at like maybe 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock, someone fires up a joint. Someone breaks out a line of coke or something sexually explicit happens. And the people that are freaked out by that split. But then the people that want to continue the party, they're going to be compromised. They're going to end up on the yacht.
And do they know that they're being compromised?
No.
They have no idea.
And that's the thing. Craig Spence was getting a lot of media. And Jeffrey Epstein was getting a lot of media. And you cannot be a blackmailer if you're getting a lot of media. So their ability to blackmail people was quite negligent, was essentially had diminished exponentially because everybody knew what they were about because of all the press that they were getting.
Right.
So they were expendable. Spence himself in Ritz-Carlton in Boston, he wore a tuxedo and took an overdose of nortriptyline, which is an antidepressant.
You think?
And I do believe that he killed himself.
Interesting.
I believe that Spence was given an ultimatum. You can kill yourself or we can kill you, depending upon, which way do you want to go? And I think Spence just went. And Spence did have AIDS.
Interesting. So he was going to die in short order.
He was going to die anyway. And plus, Spence, like Epstein, had a huge ego and a big mouth. And there's no way that they could let those guys continue to run around.
Now, which politicians, if there's any that are public or that you've already written about, do you think were compromised in the Franklin scandal specifically?
Oh, I'll tell you. Okay, Larry Craig was in Washington, D.C. for 25 years. He was a hyper-conservative, uber-conservative from Idaho. And I think he probably had the worst record for voting against gay rights of anybody in the Senate. Henry Vincent, the guy who I was just telling you about, who ran the gay escort service, he provided Craig with gay escorts. But Kirby Dick, who's a pretty renowned documentary maker, made a film called Outrage about how gay politicians vote against gay rights. And Craig was featured in that. And there were other escorts that Henry hadn't sent to Craig that were interviewed. So Craig was in Washington, D.C. for 25 years, first as a House of Representatives guy, and then as a senator. Totally compromised. And this is the kicker with Craig. He was in a bathroom in the Minneapolis International Airport. And now there's a signaling that gays do in like bathrooms where they'll slap their foot in the stall. And if the other dude's had to try it, then they'll, I guess, maybe he'll slap his foot or say, whatever.
Yeah, I think it was like a back in the day thing when you had to be more surreptitious about it.
So, well, this was, I think, like 10 years ago.
Oh,
so,
really?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
So Craig responded to this Vice Squad cop slapping his foot, and then they arrested him. Now, how hard would it be? I mean, the guy's trying to pick up a guy in a bathroom in an airport. How hard would it be to compromise that guy?
Yeah, I mean, it seems like an insatiable desire.
I mean, a kid with a smartphone doing an after-school project could probably compromise Larry Craig.
Now, do you think he was compromised with audio-visual blackmail or just based off of the testimony of the escort service?
I mean, I believe that Henry said that he was giving Craig escorts, these other guys saying that Craig was getting escorts. So, and then he's trying to pick people up in bathrooms. I mean,
right.
I'm from Minneapolis, and I was sitting on a commode once, and some guy was slapping his foot next to in the stall over, and I'm just glad. I thought he had a neurological disorder. I felt bad for him, but I'm really glad I didn't say, "Could I help you?"
Maybe Taco Bell. Who knows?
So, but yeah, Craig was definitely compromised. I'll give you another example,
please. And I guess specifically with maybe King's underage escorts, if you know any of that.
Well, I'll give you an underage example. Dennis Hastert was in Washington, D.C. for many years. He was the Speaker of the House from 1999 to 2006. Constitutionally, that's the third most powerful person in the country. Now, he had a history of boys going back 40 years, at least 40 years. And what happened with him, he was a strong arm specialist when he was in the House. I mean, he was the House Majority Leader, and like he made sure that you voted the way that he wanted you to vote. And what happened with him, there was a FBI whistleblower named Sibel Edmonds. And she talked about the FBI knowing about Craig doing this type of stuff when he was Speaker of the House. So it's not like federal law enforcement didn't know about this.
Mm-hmm. So
Craig had been little boys all these years.
And that's confirmed?
Absolutely.
Wow.
And what happened, he left the House, and then he had a very, very lucrative, he was doing a lot of lobbying with various countries, including Turkey. And he was making millions and millions of dollars. Now, I don't know why he got taken down, but he got taken down. Someone was blackmailing him. One of his victims was blackmailing him. And Craig was paying him off. And the FBI chose to go after Craig instead of the blackmailer. So my thoughts on that are Craig got too greedy. So I think he was tossed off the yacht because he got too greedy.
And where is he now? Is he in prison?
No, he's in Washington, or he's in Michigan. He did go to prison for a while, but then he's in Illinois, and he won't return my calls.
He went to prison for these crimes?
Well, he went to prison for financial manipulation, so he could pay off his blackmailer.
Interesting. Wow.
But here's the thing with that. If the FBI really wanted to shut that down, it could have, because the FBI could have gone to the blackmailer and said, if you continue to blackmail Dennis Hastert, we're going to put your ass in prison forever.
Right. They could have protected him.
But
extortion is technically illegal.
But they didn't, because,
right.
And we don't know why, but my belief is that, he was making millions and millions of dollars as a lobbyist. I just think that he had gotten too big for his britches, and was someone high up probably wanted a cut. And, he said, no, I'm Dennis Hastert. I can do what I want. And then he found out that he was Dennis Hastert, but he couldn't do what he wanted.
Interesting. Now, as far as like who's really pulling the strings and kind of the deep state that we talked about a little bit before, I know it's probably pretty nebulous and shrouded, but I'm curious, like for someone like King, who is procuring children to then deliver to politicians, is he being paid for this, or is he just given impunity to do what he wants and also embezzle?
He's embezzling money. He's embezzling millions of dollars.
So his payment,
and he's not getting audited.
So his payment is just, hey, we're going to look the other way.
Yeah, and I think that some of that money went to the Contras too.
Oh, really?
I can't prove it, but I've got accounts. I didn't say it in the book. When you write a book, there's things that you know, and then there's things that you can prove.
Right.
And when I write a book, I only go with what I can prove. But I think that some of that money, according to some sources, that money was getting diverted to the Contras.
Interesting. And Spence, the same thing, was given impunity, or was he being paid directly?
Spence was making tons of money as a lobbyist.
Got it.
And whoever he was lobbying for, there was some kind of mechanism that was giving him that was paying for his lifestyle.
Now, once a politician is compromised, certainly King and Spence, if they are doing the blackmailing, the compromising, they would have leverage over these politicians. Who else would have leverage over them? Is it like who are King and Spence working for? Does this go back kind of to that dark corner of intelligence?
Okay, I'll give you. Larry King and Craig Spence are from blue collar families.
Okay. Yeah. Larry King, not that Larry King.
Yeah. Not that Larry. Lawrence King and Craig Spence are from blue collar families. They're not from money. They're not from power. Jeffrey Epstein was from a blue collar family. Not a lot of money, not a lot of power. But these guys cannot be blackmailing the most powerful men in the world without an organization behind them.
Right. They would be taken out.
That says, if you touch King, if you touch Spence, if you touch Epstein, there's going to be retribution. That is the only way. People say Epstein was blackmailing these guys. Epstein was participating in the blackmail of these guys, but there's no way he could have pulled that off without an organization behind it.
That makes sense.
That would seek retribution. And that's where people make a mistake about Epstein. They just think that he was this lone, him and Maxwell were like these lone blackmailers, but there's no way they could have done that to some of the most powerful guys in the world.
Right. And now, are they trying to get the politicians to vote a specific way? Are they trying to get them to do specific foreign deals? Like, what kind of pressure? And
all the above. I look at the United States spends $877 billion on the military. I mean, that's what we know about.
Yeah, there's black budgets and things like that.
And we're like, the next 10 countries don't spend. We're talking Russia, China, Saudi Arabia, Israel. The next 10 countries don't spend $877 billion. So obviously, I believe they're getting compromised by whatever you want to call it, the military intelligence complex. That's the military intelligence complex, the deep state, or what I say, some dark malignant corner of intelligence.
Is it possible that there's multiple intelligence and blackmailing organizations that are occurring simultaneously? Like, is it possible that there's, some type of Russian blackmail operation that's happening and a Chinese blackmail operation and, all these different governments or maybe even private individuals, billionaires trying to all do their own blackmailing operations?
I think that there's a lot of blackmailing going on.
Yeah.
I just don't think, and where people make a mistake with Epstein is they think, well, Epstein was Mossad. But there's no way that the CIA is going to let the Mossad compromise American politicians on American soil without getting a cut of that intelligence.
Well, maybe they are.
It's just not going to happen.
Mm-hmm. So it's at least joint.
Yes.
Right. But I think maybe an oversight that maybe some people make is that they think all of these schemes and every blackmailing operation that happens in the United States throughout time has all happened because of the CIA or because of Russia or because of Israel. I think it's probably more likely, in my opinion at least, that it's probably many different competing blackmailing factions that are trying to compromise people.
It's very easy to compromise these guys. These guys have a very potent psychological alchemy of lust and arrogance.
Mm-hmm.
And nothing makes people stupid like lust and arrogance. As I've often said, if love is blind, lust is deaf, dumb, and quadriplegic.
Right. That's a good way to put it.
So you've got, look at Bill Clinton. He's a very, very intelligent guy. I mean, he's an ethical eunuch, but he's a very, very intelligent guy. And why is he going to jeopardize his presidency with Monica Lewinsky?
Yeah.
Because he's pathological.
Yeah, it is a pathology, I think, at a certain point. I think that a lot of these guys probably have that. And maybe they might not be interested in, young children, but maybe they're interested in a young woman who happens to be 16. And then they're able to be like, hey, actually, that woman you were with was actually underage and now you're compromised. Yeah. Now, do you think that after they're compromised, they tell them? Like, they send them a letter and say, hey, remember that party? Actually, you're in trouble. Or do you think they request something and say, and if you don't, then maybe that party you're at will be found out?
I mean, all you got to do is give the guy a picture. Right? That's not rocket science. All you got to do is give the guy a picture and
they can figure it out.
They can definitely figure it out at that point.
So now let's just button up the Franklin scandal. Obviously, everyone went to jail and the victims got justice, right?
No, nobody got justice. And all those perps were exonerated. And Alicia Owen got 9 to 15 years for perjury.
Right.
And the authorities really tried to destroy her. They put her in solitary. This kid, 21-year-old kid, they put her in solitary for 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they really tried to destroy her. And that jury that found her guilty was heavily manipulated. I get into it in my book, heavily manipulated. But they were still out for 3 days.
And then the investigator that did all the research to interview all these victims, he ends up dying in a plane crash.
His plane blew up over Lee County, Illinois, after he met with the blackmail photographer.
I wanted to button up that conversation as well. The blackmail photographer, Rusty Nelson, how does that work? So King or Spence, they find this guy and they say, hey, we're going to have a party. Can you stand behind this mirror and take photographs? Is that how it goes?
With Rusty, he was into photography, and they gave him an opportunity to be a photographer.
Was he also compromised? Because if he's taking compromising photos, he must be compromised as well.
Well, he's been busted for...
Got it. So they find this photographer who's also... They say, hey...
But he got busted after the Franklin scam. But he took lots of material.
And like potentially before, allegedly, I don't want to speculate too strongly.
I don't know if he did that before he got hooked up with Lawrence King, but he certainly did after he got hooked up with Lawrence King.
Right. Well, if I'm going to hire a photographer for blackmail, I would some way have collateral on them because they're going to have access to all the photographs and be able to make some type of...
There was another photographer. I was never able to find him.
And now, did Rusty face consequences for his involvement?
No, because according to state and federal law enforcement, not a single child was abused.
Right.
But the FBI really scared Rusty. I mean, he was living in a farmhouse, and I saw what that farmhouse looks like. Someone took like a machine gun and just sprayed it.
Oh, really? So they tried to take him out?
I don't think they tried to take him out, but they tried to make sure that he left the state.
Yeah, wow. I'm curious why they wouldn't try to take him out as well, because he's as dangerous, and maybe not, actually, no, the investigator's probably more dangerous than...
The investigator was going to break it wide open.
Right.
I think Rusty had a finite number of pictures. I think that King was very circumspect about making sure that Rusty didn't have pictures, but Rusty was able to smuggle some out.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe he gave them all to Gary Caradori in Chicago, and Caradori was flying back from Chicago to Lincoln, Nebraska, and his plane exploded over Lee County, Illinois.
Now, he was flying his own aircraft?
Yeah.
Now, I guess if you're doing an investigation on potentially, very powerful people doing, getting blackmailed, maybe don't fly your own plane. I wonder if there's a train or a commercial jet you could have taken.
The thing with him, where he made a mistake, he thought he was too high profile.
Caradori.
Yeah.
He thought, I'm already on the record. I was assigned to this by the investigative board. They're not going to do anything.
They're not going to kill me.
Gotcha. That makes sense. Now, there's an element to this that we had discussed briefly before, and I thought you had really interesting thoughts on it. Some of the victims from the Franklin case alleged that there was what was called ritual abuse.
Yes.
And I believe they mentioned that there were pentagrams involved and that there was some type of satanic element. And I'm curious what your thoughts are on that ripple of the story.
According to Wikipedia and the FBI, ritual abuse has never existed, nor will it ever exist. As I said earlier, the FBI categorizes serial killers as ritualistic and non-ritualistic. So it's kind of weird that it doesn't categorize as ritualistic and non-ritualistic.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, there are a number of examples. Scores and scores of examples of ritual abuse. My thoughts on that are, it's a relatively small part of the Franklin scandal, but my thoughts on that are, there is a group of occultists that are very, very dark, and their highest sacrament is the destruction of innocence. They're like, the ideal Christian sacrament is the preservation and the cultivation of innocence. But with these guys, it's the destruction of innocence. That's their sacrament.
I see. So they get involved in these circles allegedly, and they, sort of conduct that destruction of innocence.
Yeah. I don't know how someone, I'm sure that it happens incrementally, or maybe some guys are just outright evil and into it. I don't know.
That makes sense. Now, do you think that element of the story is important, or do you think it kind of disrides the whole thing as being a part of this satanic panic spread and kind of throws the whole thing out the window?
I mean, if people read my book, The Franklin Scandal, I've got plenty of documentation. And with ritual abuse, I mean, I've got police reports on it. I've got notes from a psychiatric hospital on it. There's a tremendous amount of literature on ritual abuse if someone really wants to understand it. It's very strange. The Wikipedia talks about people ritualistically murdering people.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's in Wikipedia. So people can ritualistically murder people, but yet they're not going to ritualistically children. It's kind of contradictory.
Yeah, that's interesting.
And I will say this, with the satanic panic, it swung very far. And then when it came back, it swung very far the other way.
Mm-hmm.
So, but there are examples of, there was a priest in Ohio some years back who ritualistically murdered a nun. I mean, like, put like 5 like daggers in her in the form of a pentagram.
Oh, wow.
I mean, it happens.
Right.
It's out there. I mean, people are evil, can be evil.
Right. Yeah. It just is an interesting part of the whole story to me to think, were these guys in some way, aware of this, or were there just other occult people that were involved, and why were they doing this? Like, if they were just straight up, like, why are they also involving themselves in the occult element? It just seems bizarre.
I think that some of them were involved in the occult, and with King for sure, and we're into the destruction of innocence, and then some are just
yeah, I think that's probably true. That makes sense.
I mean, that's what I've concluded.
Now, I wanted to ask you also about an individual, a child that was abducted named Johnny Gosch.
Yes,
who has a really interesting kind of part with this type of topic. So Johnny Gosch was abducted in the late 70s. And
actually, in 1982.
It was 82.
Yeah.
Oh, interesting. I thought it was 70s, excuse me. And disappears. And do you believe that there was any connection with this specific case? Where was Johnny Gosch abducted from?
West Des Moines.
Do you think he was connected to some type of trafficking, or do you think it was just a...
Okay, so Paul Benassi, one of the Franklin victims, said that he took part in Johnny Gosch's abduction. America's Most Wanted did 5 segments on the Johnny Gosch abduction. And Paul Sparrow, the producer, believes that Paul Benassi knew Johnny Gosch after Johnny Gosch was abducted. I found the house where actually, America's Most Wanted found the house. Paul told America's Most Wanted that there was a chamber below the house where the kids would be stashed. And it was near an elephant-shaped rock. And then America's Most Wanted went there.
And whose house was this?
The guy who owned it at that point, his name was Charles Crouch. And they found a chamber beneath the house where the kids would carve their initials. And now, I found Charles Crouch. He's living in New Mexico. And I tried to alert law enforcement to him, and one guy seemed like he was into it, but then he just backed away from it. But Charles Crouch has been kids since the early 60s. And to his son, his wife's brother, I mean, and then he ended up in Colorado where he bought that house, and he was a prison guard. Now, you cannot be a prison guard and be a felon. You can't do it. So, and then he fled Colorado with warrants out for his, with warrants. But then all of a sudden they were lifted. And I did a criminal background check on him, and there isn't one count of child abuse in his criminal history.
Interesting.
In Colorado or in New Mexico, and he's in Carlsbad, New Mexico now. We could go visit him if you want to visit him.
I'm okay. I think I'm busy that weekend.
Okay.
But that chamber was part of the testimony from Benassi.
Paul Benassi told America's Most Wanted that there was a chamber beneath the house.
Now, this individual is interesting, and he was a victim of the Franklin scandal. He came and he testified. Did he speak with that main investigator?
Yes.
And so he was a victim and then later was complicit in sort of the, capture and sort of recruitment of other children.
Yes, he was both with Epstein and with the Franklin scandal, the kids become scavengers. Like Epstein would pay someone $200 if they brought another kid.
Right.
And that was the same thing with the Franklin scandal.
So he testifies that I shouldn't say testifies, he, I guess, admits that he captured Johnny Gosch and was a part of his...
That he was part of the Johnny Gosch abduction.
And then he was with Johnny Gosch in the basement of this home?
Afterwards, yeah.
And then his testimony says there's an underground chamber, and then they find that there is some type of...
Well, he told America's Most Wanted that there was an underground chamber, and then they went there and they found an underground chamber.
Is it possible it's just a basement, or is it an underground chamber?
It's an underground chamber.
I see. And did they find initials of...
Yeah, the kids.
And there was no investigation afterward that?
No. Just like Charles Crouch doesn't have any counts of child abuse on his record. When he started kids in the early 60s.
But there's evidence of this, I'm assuming?
I've got a newspaper article on it.
I see.
So...
Did he face jail time for any of his...
No.
So, but there's a news article that's saying, oh, this guy...
There's a news article. You can go to my website and check this stuff out. There's a news article from 1963 talking about him and 3 kids.
As a part of a police investigation or just a journalist that found it?
It was an article about him getting indicted.
But yet
those counts were lifted.
Bizarre.
Yeah.
Do you think it's possible he was connected to intelligence or used as an asset in some way?
I mean, how did he kids all those years? How did he have a house that had an underground chamber where kids were taken? Why did he flee Colorado with warrants out for him? What were the warrants? We don't have any of that information.
Bizarre.
And I've spent a lot of time looking into that guy, and there's no child abuse on his police records.
Bizarre.
It's pretty amazing.
Now, Johnny Gosch's mother claims that he visited her.
Yes.
But much later, that after the abduction, as I guess a teenager or a young adult, he came home and saw her.
There's an article that was written by a CNN journalist named Thomas Lake that if people want to read about it, it's a pretty good article.
So he gets abducted and just goes and sees his mother, and then that's... do people write off that story? Or is that accepted as...
Most people wrote her off because she's had some difficulties, but this CNN journalist felt her to be telling the truth, felt that she was telling the truth.
Interesting. Now, Lawrence King, the main sort of linchpin of this entire scandal, he ends up going to prison for financial crimes.
10 years, yeah.
And now is still alive.
Yeah, actually, King was given like a no-show job at a BM dealership in Virginia. So the deal with King was keep your mouth shut and, you'll be taken care of.
Wow.
King has tried to inveigle himself into Granville Academy, which it's not even a school. It takes children on field trips, lower socioeconomic children on field trips. And he tried to inveigle himself into that. I got him kicked out of that.
You got him kicked out of it?
Yeah. And then he tried to and then he inveigled himself into the Washington Redskins event committee. I got him kicked out of that. Then he inveigled himself into Opera Nova that does a number of things, but it helps with lower socioeconomic children, giving them voice lessons. I got him kicked out of that.
Wow.
Now he's in a church in Alexandria Virginia, that doesn't want to kick him out. I've tried to get him kicked out of that. But that's how backwards this thing is, that a journalist has to protect kids from a super predator because the feds know what kind of a predator King is.
But he's not on any registry or anything because he has
according to law enforcement, he's never molested a single kid.
Wow. And now it seems like everyone that's been involved with this case ends up not in a good spot. Like there's, countless examples of this victim's sibling gets killed or the journalist dies in a plane crash.
Alicia's brother was murdered, I believe that.
I mean, there's like a laundry list of, 10 to 15 people who have in some way met their demise. It seems like in, some type of suspicious...
There were a number of people that died with the Franklin scandal.
Now, I imagine a lot of these people are still alive. Lawrence King, is still working.
He's still alive. He's living in... Actually, I got a picture of him. He visited Omaha about 2 months ago. I got a picture of him. Put it on Twitter.
He must not like you.
Well, the thing about King is I called him up.
You spoke to him?
Well, I called him up and he said he wasn't him. So the conversation, there wasn't much of an evolution with the conversation.
Bizarre. I mean, are you worried that he might try to seek retribution against you in some way?
I mean, I've been a thorn in his side forever. So if there was going to be retribution against me, I think it would have come by now.
Yeah, the Franklin scandal is upsetting and frustrating, but I'm glad that, there's someone out there brave enough to do the work to actually get into it and morbid enough to, go through all the dirt. I'm grateful for all your work.
That individual is probably quite stupid, wouldn't you think?
I agree. He's handsome, but he's very dumb. He's extremely dumb. I wanted to move on to speaking about Jeffrey Epstein and actually P Diddy as well. I think that kind of ties in an interesting way. Hey, what's up, guys? We're going to take a break really quick because I need to tell you about a brand I'm so excited to be working with. You probably see me wearing this sleek little bracelet right here, this very fashionable, cool, trendy little wrist gadget. And I don't wear it just because it looks cool. I wear it because it tells me everything I need to know about my health, specifically how I sleep. This is called a Whoop. You probably heard of it. You've probably seen people wearing it, top performance athletes, professionals, entrepreneurs. Probably seen them rocking this old thing. This is the most advanced health and fitness wearable on the market. This is a product that I actually use all the time. You probably see me on Flagrant. You probably see me on this show rocking this very Whoop I have on my wrist. It's awesome. I connect it to my iPhone on this app right here. This is my actual data. I use it specifically for sleep. There's a lot of different things you can use it for. It's nice because I can track my workouts. It automatically detects when I'm weightlifting, when I'm playing soccer. It just tags it and it goes, oh, we detected that you've been, working out for these hours. And it tracks my heart rate. It sees how high I got my heart rate to. I can tell the intensity of my workouts. I can see if I push it, if I was kind of phoning it in. And then furthermore, my favorite element is sleep. It tells you exactly how you're sleeping. It shows you your 5 most important metrics, your respiratory rate, resting heart rate variability, a bunch of things. And it tells you how you slept, how you recovered, and how you can sleep better. It's absolutely amazing. It can track your sleep throughout the night. It can even tell you how many hours you're sleeping. It's absolutely amazing. I use it all the time. My heart rate variability is a little bit down. So what's interesting with the Whoop, I actually discovered that when I drank caffeine during the day, I was actually sleeping worse if I drank it too late. And furthermore, when I drank alcohol, my recovery was a little bit worse. So I was like, oh, I should be more specific and sporadic when I drink. It made me make more mindful decisions about my health. And it actually made me say, you know what, for October, I'm cutting out alcohol. That's right. I'm doing sober October, and I think I'm doing it with all the boys. That's right. All the Flagrant boys, allegedly. If you want to join us in the Sober October Challenge, you can go to join.whoop.com/camp. That's right. That's join.whoop, WHOOP.com/camp. And if you join, use the code CAMP, you are going to get a 1-month free trial. It's absolutely amazing. Everything you need to know. Take control of your health today and sleep better and recover faster. Let's get back to the show. Jeffrey Epstein, obviously, is a famous financier. That's all he's always known for. And was I guess arrested in, was it 2006?
The Palm Beach Police Department had a warrant to arrest him on 5 counts of child abuse. They had the statements of 5 victims, but then they also knew of 17 more. So they were aware of 22 victims. And they served a search warrant on his house, and they were going to arrest him. And then that case got taken away from them and given to a grand jury.
Which, as we know, the grand juries are somewhat malleable.
And if your listeners or viewers go to my website, I really dissected the 2006 Jeffrey Epstein grand jury.
So he gets arrested, serves a pretty cushy jail sentence, and then goes back out and kind of keeps on living his life.
Well, actually, he was given 18 months and he did 13, but he only had to come and he had his wing of the jail fixed up like the Taj Mahal. And then he was paying the corrections people. And he had to come back at night. He didn't have to go out during, he got to go out during the day and girls.
Right. Yeah, so, while he was in prison.
While he was in prison.
And there's testimonies from girls that were victims of his in that time that said, yes, this happened.
And yes, people have said that.
Now, I think most people are on board with the fact that Jeffrey Epstein is a sex criminal. I think most people accept that Ghislaine Maxwell, likely the same. Could you make the case that he was an intelligence asset and that he was blackmailing people? And what is the evidence for that?
Okay, Alexander Acosta was a U.S. attorney for the Southern District of Florida. And when that state grand jury came back with no indictments of child abuse, Michael Ryder, who was the police chief of the Palm Beach Police Department, who's a real hero in this story, real hero, he became vociferous. I mean, he said that this is the greatest modern miscarriage of justice in the United States. And he went to the Department of Justice and said, Epstein needs to be taken down. He's all these girls. Now, he knew of 22. By the time he went to the Department of Justice, they had a list of like 32 underage victims.
32.
At least 32. I've got the list. And Alexander Acosta was going to impanel a grand jury to go after Jeffrey Epstein, but he was told he had to stand down because Epstein was intelligence.
And who told him that, and where is that found?
Okay, so he said it when he became Trump's Secretary of Labor. And when he was being vetted for that job, he was asked, why did you go so easy on Epstein? And he said, I was told to stand down because Epstein was intelligence.
He said that on the record.
He said that to the Trump people. Yeah. And he's never denied saying that. He's been asked if he said that. He's never denied saying it.
Wow.
And to me, it's very obvious that Jeffrey Epstein was a similar situation like the Franklin scandal, where you've got Jeffrey Epstein was a CIA asset and all his homes were wired for audiovisual blackmail. And who knows what else he was doing.
So how does Epstein's story unfold? He's a working class, blue collar kid. He kind of works his way up, goes to a prestigious school, the Dalton School, and becomes a wealthy guy. How does that work?
What's interesting with that is I've got camp pictures from Interlochen. It's a really famous arts camp in northern Michigan. I've got pictures. Now, this is strange. It's a yearbook, but it doesn't have the names of the students. But I strongly suggest to your viewers or listeners that they go to my website because there's a picture of little Jeffrey Epstein. And there's also a picture that I believe is little Donald Barr or little William Barr, who was the attorney general.
We can include those pictures here while you're talking about it so people can see.
What's really horrific about William Barr is he was the attorney general that covered up Franklin, him and Richard Thornburg, and then he covered up Epstein. He's a dirty guy. He's been a CIA guy forever.
So he was the attorney general at the time of the Franklin scandal.
Yeah.
And he sent his son to the same.
No. Donald Barr was the headmaster of Dalton. William Barr was the attorney general during Franklin. Well, it was started with Richard Thornburg was the attorney general, and then he went to go run for the Senate in Pennsylvania, and then William Barr became the attorney general. And he made sure that because the Washington, D.C. component in Franklin was very big, and there was a grand jury on that was also hijacked. So William Barr was making sure that the Franklin scandal was completely evaporated. And he did something very similar with Epstein.
And so this camp photograph, it shows young Epstein.
Yes.
And also allegedly.
And okay, so Interlaken can't deny that Epstein didn't go there because he built a lodge, the Jeffrey Epstein Lodge,
Much later,
which has since been renamed, I should add.
I can imagine.
But then there's a picture of William Barr there. Now Interlaken said that William Barr never went there, but there's a picture of William Barr that the picture of William Barr, little William Barr, looks more like William Barr than the picture of little Epstein looks like Epstein. Interesting. And it was Donald Barr, his dad, who hired Jeffrey Epstein. They were at the Interlock camp in 1967, and 8 years later, Epstein was hired at Dalton. He was a college dropout, and he was hired at Dalton, which is very anomalous.
Now, is there any other connection between Epstein and William Barr that they had been friends since they were young?
We don't know.
I see. But he was hired by Donald Barr.
Donald Barr, yeah.
That makes sense. So it's possible, if this photograph is actually what you're alleging that it is, that Donald Barr has known Epstein effectively his whole life.
For a very long time, yeah.
Interesting. So he comes up in New York City and then goes to work with Donald Barr's company.
Well, Donald Barr is the headmaster of Dalton.
Right.
And he hires Epstein, who... And Dalton is one of the more prestigious preparatory schools in the United States, maybe even the most. You would think that they wouldn't hire a college dropout.
Mm-hmm. But, nepotism is a real thing, and cronyism, and if he knows the guy.
I mean, if it was nepotism, then Donald Barr knew Jeffrey Epstein.
I see.
I mean, if it's going to be nepotism.
Right. Which that part is not, out of bounds for me. I could see, hey, if these guys know each other and then he's a guy that I know, I'll give him a job.
Well, he's a that knows my son who's in the CIA. So yeah, they're going to be compromising people together. So yeah, let's give him a job.
Had he done sex crimes by the time he was hired by Donald Barr? I mean, there's, I guess, what is proven and then what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, there are people that say that he was inappropriate with the students. But we again, it's one of those things we just don't know.
Got it. And then after the Dalton school, he then moves on to Bear Stearns. Is that true?
Yes.
And then from there, how does he eventually get involved into this?
I don't know. But I think a similar dynamic that occurred with Lawrence King and Craig Spence occurred with Jeffrey Epstein, where he got busted. Young girls. His thing was pubescent girls.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, he was turned. And his life unfolded very much like Lawrence King and Craig Spence, where he had money for nothing and little girls for free.
Right.
With impunity.
So it's possible that he was caught, compromised, basically given a deal.
Yeah. I mean, and it's difficult to know. I mean, Donald Barr wrote a book about intergalactic child trafficking, sex trafficking,
mm-hmm.
in which a 15-year-old is. It's pretty graphic about a 15-year-old getting. That's Donald Barr, the guy who William Barr's father, who hired Jeffrey Epstein.
Right.
But I don't know where in that milieu Epstein ultimately got turned, but he did get turned somewhere.
And then when do you think this operation officially starts, that he is now working? What does the paper trail kind of show as far as when he really starts to compromise people?
I would say the mid-'80s. Leslie Wexner, who was the CEO of L Brands, Tommy Hilfiger, Victoria's Secret, we go on and on and on.
Wealthy guy.
A billionaire.
Mm-hmm.
Multiple billionaire. He gave Epstein power of attorney over his empire in 1987.
Wow.
So Epstein could do whatever he wanted with those billions of dollars. Now, why does a guy give Jeffrey Epstein the keys to his kingdom?
I mean, maybe they're good buddies.
I'm
trying to come up with an explanation here. It's a bizarre thing to do, especially in that time.
And they hadn't known each other that long.
Oh, really?
No.
I mean, what do you have a theory? Again, this is pure conjecture here.
I think he's compromised.
And that eventually led to him giving Epstein keys.
You know, okay, so Wexner brought Southern Air Transport to Ohio, which is CI proprietary airlines. That's one of the things. So it shows that he's kind of hooked into intelligence there. But he's also hooked into the mob, big time, the Genovese crime family.
In what way?
There's a guy named Frank Walsh who owns Walsh Trucking Company. He's an appendage of the Genovese crime family. He carted most of L Brand's merchandise around the country. And actually, there was an attorney for L Brands who was shot in the back of the head with a .22 execution style. And there was a police report that came out about it that I have. It was ordered destroyed by that police chief, but I have a copy, and it's floating around the internet too. And Leslie Wexner is the number one suspect in that homicide.
Him directly or one of his henchmen? One
of his minions.
Yeah. Wow. That's in the police report that he's a suspect?
It was in the police report that he's the number one suspect.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. Huh. That is.
And the police chief ordered that report to be destroyed, but it wasn't. So.
Wow. So now Epstein gets tied up with Wexner, is able to get some money. I think he gets some like pretty clear donations from him that he's getting, money to invest or something to that effect.
He's getting as much money. I mean, Les Wexner is a billionaire, and Jeffrey Epstein can do whatever he wants with Les Wexner's money. So
right. And at the time, is Epstein in South Florida or is he in New York?
He's in South Florida. He's in New York. He's in New Mexico. He's got a place in the UK. He's got a place in France. I mean.
Wow. So he's operating with impunity basically from the mid 80s up until 2006.
Well, he operated with impunity up until 2019, really.
Fair, but he never got any type of scrutiny up until that point. And he's sort of, rubbing shoulders with high society. Obviously, there's infamous photographs of him and Trump, him and Prince Andrew.
Him and everybody.
Yeah. And how do you think that works? Like, as far as him getting involved in these high-profile circles, do you think he's a charming guy that eventually kind of sees his way in? Does the money eventually just get in the way? Does he throw parties? Like, how do you think the actual social networking element works?
Well, yeah, I think all the above, what you just said. And Ghislaine Maxwell also was an entree into high society.
And when do you think he links up with her?
Sometime in the 80s.
And why do you think they hit it off? Do you think she's also intelligence and they're coupled together? Or do you think that was an organic relationship?
I think that she might be intelligence. I mean, she was certainly aware of what he was doing.
Of course.
There's no doubt about that. And she was facilitating it. She was trafficking these children along with him. So she was definitely involved. There's an article from the Evening Standard from 2001 that talks about Epstein bragging that he's CIA and he's also a good friend of Anand Khashoggi, the major arms dealer that was murdered. But it also says that he and William Gates are doing business in the 90s. The cover story on Epstein and Gates is that they met in 2011, I believe. But according to this article, Gates and Epstein were doing business in the 90s.
That article, Epstein says that he's intelligence?
Epstein said that he's a CIA guy, yeah.
And what is this article?
It's, you can look it up, Evening Standard. It's on, I believe it's on my website. And the guy who wrote it says he used to brag about being a CIA agent, but now he doesn't anymore. Something along those lines.
So that was like a party conversation that Epstein would bring up. Like, yeah, I'm CIA. He would say that to people.
I don't know if it was a party, but he would say that he was CIA, yeah. And then at a certain point, he stopped.
That just seems so arrogant or stupid that he would tell people that he's an asset.
Well, I don't think anybody's ever accused Jeffrey Epstein of humility.
That's fair.
So, but I think one of the most important parts of that article, and this is in 2001, this is before anybody knows about him, is that he's doing business with Gates in 1990.
Right.
That's what's really interesting to me.
Now, in fairness, I do want to say that I don't think that every person that ever has a photograph with Jeffrey Epstein or that ever did business with him is inherently complicit in some type of sex crime.
No, absolutely not. But a lot of them are.
Yeah, sure.
Sure.
And again, I don't want to defend here, but
I mean, there's a definitive link between Gates and Epstein. I mean, and according to various sources, Gates's wife left him because of Epstein.
Yeah, I'd heard about. I'm curious what you think as far as how that goes. So what's documented, I guess, is that they had met in 2011. They had discussed something involving philanthropy in some capacity.
The cover story is that Bill Gates wanted a Nobel Prize, and he felt that Epstein could help him get a Nobel Prize. That's why they met.
Right.
I mean, and if you believe that, there's a bridge not very far from here. We're in Brooklyn. I should add that. I'm willing to sell you. I'm willing to give you a really good deal.
You promise not to screw me on it?
I promise.
All right. I might take you up on it. Yeah, it is an interesting thing. I wonder, I had heard this theory, someone was speaking to Joe Rogan about this actually, that potentially that he was looking for a way to basically move money into a philanthropy trust to hide it from his wife when they got divorced. And that Bill Gates was employing Jeffrey Epstein as a way to do this, or was having meetings with him in order to do this, which again, he's meeting with the guy after he was convicted of a sex crime. But that's another theory that I had heard that I thought was interesting.
Why doesn't the media look into them doing business in the 1990s?
Yeah, I'm curious.
The media is so malfeasant in this. The media with Epstein has been very good at digging up salacious dirt. That's all they do. They don't scream for justice. That's how our media has no moral barometer.
Mm-hmm. Now, actually, to the credit of the independent journalists in South Florida that initially broke the story in 2006, it was just one or two independent journalists, I believe, that actually put the story out there. Is that true?
Well, it was one. It was one with the Miami Herald.
So that's one media figure that did the right thing, but the rest of the media is looking for ways to obfuscate.
She did that, but I remember talking to a Palm Beach reporter about Epstein. And they were just flummoxed why Epstein was given this deal. And I said, and this was after I acquired Jeffrey Epstein's Black Book. I said, do you think blackmail has anything to do with this or anything? And they were just very naive. But I acquired Epstein's Black Book in 2012. And there's scores of victims.
What do you mean? That the actual women who were victimized by him are in the book?
They're in the book. They're numbers. And I started calling them first because I wanted to know what exactly, because I was thinking Epstein was probably a network. At that point, he was just alone.
Right.
So when I got the Black Book in 2012, I started calling the victims, and they were telling me about being flown to the island. And then at that point, I knew that Epstein was running a network.
Now, when Epstein eventually gets clipped in, was it 2019, 2020?
2019, yeah.
They raid his home in South Florida as well as New York, and they uncover blackmail, evidence.
DVDs, hundreds or thousands, depending upon what source.
Now, it's confirmed that those DVDs were blackmail, or is that not a part of the official story?
I mean, some of those DVDs have little plus redacted. We don't know because everything is redacted. I mean, when I filed my FOIA requests for reports on the DVDs, I mean, they're never going to give me reports on the DVDs.
Was there other one-way mirrors or camera setups in his home that were discovered?
Well, in his New York home, there was a setup like Spence's.
Oh, really?
Yeah, where there was a secret room and monitors. And according to Maria Farmer and I guess Virginia Giuffre, there were men, as in plural, looking at the monitors. And the monitors had all the bedrooms and all the bathrooms.
And all the bathrooms.
Yeah.
Wow. So even if someone was in no way involved, that they would, he would have them in compromising video footage.
Well, it's not a bathroom you'd really want to defecate in, I imagine.
Yeah. Wow. And that's confirmed in the police report, or this was uncovered later?
No, this is what the witnesses are saying.
Wow.
The police aren't giving us anything. Law enforcement isn't.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the media is just digging up salacious dirt.
Now, why does Jeffrey Epstein come down? In 2019, what is the motivation to get him and neutralize him?
As I said earlier, media.
He got overexposed.
There was too much media on him. And you cannot be a blackmailer. You cannot be an effective blackmailer if people know that you're going to blackmail them.
Right.
He had just received, he's like Craig Spence, just too much press, too much media attention.
Too exposed. He's out there too much. There's too much conversation about this guy. I remember my mom talking about him in 2015, being like, "Oh yeah, there's this guy in South Florida who's he's a sex criminal, gets a sweetheart deal." Explain the whole 2006 case, and I was like, "That's crazy." And then when he actually gets taken out in 2019, I was like, "Wow, that is." I was surprised that he was actually taken out and not just given rollback, and basically just said like, "Hey, go to your island and leave us alone."
Too much press.
Yeah. Were they afraid that he was going to talk, or that he was in some way going to leak information?
He was very arrogant. I mean, that could have been a consideration for sure.
Like, I wonder why they don't just threaten him and say, "Hey, your use and your utility to us has now reached its end, and you can go away. And if you ever come back again, we're going to kill you."
The thing is, Epstein had a big ego. Craig Spence had a big ego. The people that Craig Spence was working for, they weren't exactly sure what he was going to say and what he wasn't going to say. And I think that Epstein might have been the same way. He was too used to living the high life. And he had too many people. He facilitated the compromising of many, many people.
Now, that black book that you had mentioned that you eventually got your hands on, you have the unredacted version?
Yeah.
And so all the numbers and the names and everything that was in the book.
I could have called Mick Jagger if I wanted to.
Now, why does he have this book? I always assumed this was like a Rolodex. This is just a...
Yeah, it was a Rolodex.
So I think there's a connotation like, oh, his black book, everyone that's in the book is either a victim or a...
No, but there's a lot of them that are.
Now, you mentioned that there's circling of names.
Yes.
Where does the name circling come from? Who's circling these names, and what does that mean?
Okay. Epstein's house manager, Alfredo Rodriguez, was the guy that stole the black book. And at that point, there were attorneys in Southern Florida that were launching civil suits at Epstein. And he called one of the attorneys and he said, "I've got like the Holy Grail and I'm willing to sell it to you." The attorney called the FBI and they did a sting on him and busted him. He wanted to sell the black book for like $50,000 or $60,000. But he had circled people in the black book who he said were in cahoots with Epstein.
Wow. And what happened to him? Where is he now?
He's dead. Cancer.
Okay. Yeah. The way you said that made me think it wasn't.
But he ended up in prison. He got busted with an assault rifle.
Oh, really?
Apparently, he felt like he needed an assault rifle.
Interesting. So he gets busted for illegal possession of a firearm?
Yeah, well, after he got busted for the black book, because he was asked if he had any evidence about Epstein.
And he withheld that.
Yeah.
Probably a mistake. He probably should have just handed it over.
Well, he thought he was going to make a score.
Yeah.
I don't think we're talking about a guy who has the cognitive abilities of a brain surgeon with
Fair.
Alfredo Rodriguez.
Fair. Okay, that's interesting. Now, are there any significant names that he circled that you think are worthy of conversation?
Well, I mean, I can give you a lot of the names that he circled. I mean, He circled Les Wexner. He circled Donald Trump. He circled Alan Dershowitz. He circled Ehud Barak. There's a lot of names that he circled.
Interesting. And as the House manager, he would have had, some type of eyewitness reporting of the things that were happening in the home. And he was the House manager of the South Florida home?
Yes. Yeah.
Got it. And then Epstein's Island. What a percentage of his crimes do you think took place on the island versus in South Florida versus New York? Like, do you think it was centralized as far as where it happened, or it was just wherever he was?
Wherever Epstein was, it was a crime scene.
Got it. And every house basically had some type of surveillance mechanism.
It's interesting. Juliette Bryant, who's a very sweet woman, was in, now I could be telling this incorrectly, but I think for the most part it's right. She was in his New Mexico place. And at a certain point, she just lost consciousness. And then she came to, and there was a doctor harvesting her ovums.
What?
Yeah, that's what she says. And I believe her. I mean,
when did that happen?
Early 2000s, I think.
Wow.
And in 1996, Dolly the sheep was cloned. And I just knew at that point, if they're cloning sheep, there's going to be megalomaniac billionaires that are out there cloning themselves. It's very easy to clone. You can clone someone for like $1.5 million. What you do is you have an ovum, you take the DNA out of an ovum, and then you insert the DNA that you want in the ovum, and then you give an electrical shock to start the mitosis process, the cell divides. And why else would they be harvesting her ovums?
I mean, I couldn't imagine. I mean, the cloning thing is I mean.
You can clone a French bulldog for $65,000. People are cloning their French bulldogs.
Yeah, I've seen that before. I've seen that. I mean, was there?
It's very easy to clone.
Was Epstein into cloning? Did he talk about this?
I mean, he was into transhumanism, and I wouldn't be surprised if he was in. Why would they be harvesting her ovums if they weren't going to be cloning each other?
I mean, maybe to sell them. I have no idea, but that's. I mean, trying to harvest someone's ovums is insanely evil. The intention behind it. I mean, I mean, it'd be unfair for me to speculate.
You can clone your French bulldog. Yeah, I mean, for $65,000. I mean, I've always thought it was, and I got nothing against bulldogs, and I've got nothing against the French, but I always thought it was bad karma to be a French bulldog. I mean, I don't know.
They can't breathe.
I just think that you did something in the previous lifetime, and then, it was bad, and then you become a French bulldog.
It depends which one you are, though. If you're in like a mansion somewhere and,
it's
the Virgin Islands on Epstein's Island, you're a bulldog.
A woman that I was going out with wanted to get a French bulldog, and I said,
flag.
No, I'm not gonna.
You got to break up with
I can't live with a French bulldog.
No,
I just can't live with
You're not wrong for that. Yeah, the cloning element is I mean, maybe. I don't think anything's off the table with these guys, but it's it's just crazy.
Like I said, it's not that difficult to clone someone.
Mm-hmm. Just expensive. And this guy had money.
You can do it for $1.5 million.
Do you think he did it?
I believe that there's probably little Jeffrey Epsteins running around. I believe these guys are megalomaniacs.
Yeah.
Of course they're going to be cloning themselves. If they can, they're going to be cloning themselves.
Wow. Yeah. Is that? I'm curious. I'm not disputing your opinion here, but I'm curious. Is that based in like any of his interest? Was he speaking with doctors that did this type of procedure?
Totally into transhumanism.
Okay.
Totally into it.
And that's through just conversations. I've seen him like meet with different, intellectuals and academics,
scientists.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, he was big into transhumanism.
Interesting. Now, on his island, there's the infamous temple blue and white structure.
Yes.
What is that, and what's inside of it, and why is that not better known?
Well, there's an owl above the door, and people think that it's Moloch.
Right. This is what's seen at Bohemian Grove, which is
which is the demon that devours children.
Mm-hmm.
And a number of people believe that it's Moloch. I don't know.
But now, do we know what's inside of that building? Has that ever been?
I've heard different accounts, but I don't know. I don't know what was inside that building.
It's strange you have build an island, a compound where you house yourselves and all your friends, and then you build a giant temple-looking thing. It just seems strange to me.
With an owl. That could be Moloch. We just don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. And again, I don't want to blame every owl here for being a child devourer. I don't know if the Tootsie Pop owl.
We don't want to do that. we can't indict all the owls.
Some owls are innocent, yes. But it is peculiar to have a giant temple on your island and put an owl on the top of it for sure.
Well, Epstein did a lot of peculiar things. That's the thing.
Yeah.
I mean.
Now, Ghislaine is an interesting figure in this whole story. Her father, Robert, is connected to, he was a media mogul in Great Britain.
Yes.
That's correct?
Yeah.
And died, I guess, falling off a boat.
Yes.
Potentially connected to intelligence in some capacity. I think that is the rumor, but it's purely an allegation.
No, I think that there's enough there that he was connected to Israeli intelligence.
And what are the threads that you would draw there?
I mean, just a number of sources have said that.
Mm. And her involvement was, it seems like that she was sort of like a madam, that she was procuring young girls, both for Epstein, but also potentially in conjunction with this blackmailing operation. She's now in prison. And why is she given such a good prison sentence? And why is she still alive, furthermore?
Because, like Lawrence King, the deal was you keep your mouth shut, you're going to do some time, but you'll have lots of money when you get out. I think she's already living in a dormitory.
Mm-hmm.
And child trafficking carries a sentence of 15 to life. She should be indicted on multiple counts of child trafficking. She was indicted on one count. She was given 20 years.
And whose testimony was that?
There were 4 victims that were called to testify.
And that was the one account. That was her one charge, was the 4 victims?
Yeah, with 4 victims talking. But she was indicted on one count of child trafficking.
And do you know which victim that was? Is that
I don't know, but
published?
there were 4 victims that came forward that testified.
Virginia Giuffre was one of them?
No, she was not. She did civil lawsuits, but she was not. The 4 that came forward, and it was Damian Williams, who we'll get into when we talk about P Diddy, because he's covering that up now too. The 4 women that testified at that trial had never been by anybody other than Epstein or Maxwell. So they couldn't talk about all these other power brokers because they just weren't. They were vetted. The Southern District made sure that these women couldn't talk about other.
I see. And are they
other perps? Was
there pressure? I guess you don't necessarily have to put pressure on them. I'm trying to think of the connections with the Franklin scandal, but those victims claim to have had, been by many other people, whereas these victims, you don't necessarily need to put as much pressure on them.
I mean, if you listen to Virginia Giuffre, she was by all kinds of powerful people.
Right, but she's not included in the actual indictment.
Because she was by other people and she could implicate other people. So it was that trial was very carefully choreographed.
I see. And so they said, okay, these are the safe people we'll bring up. They'll take down Epstein and Ghislaine, and then that'll be it.
And Damian Williams was the U.S. attorney. Damian Williams is the guy that's overseeing the P Diddy investigation. And he has supposedly been, the Southern District has supposedly been seeing a grand jury about P Diddy for the last 2.5 months. P Diddy has been charged with 8 counts of sexual assault, or 8 lawsuits, civil lawsuits of sexual assault. 2 of them were minors that had been trafficked. And then Little Rod, who was the 5th lawsuit, said that P Diddy did trafficked minors. But Damian Williams who covered up Epstein, now he's going to cover up P Diddy. And P Diddy also had hidden cameras in his homes.
And that was confirmed, or those from reports?
Well, that's been confirmed by the civil lawsuit documentation.
Oh, really? So it's actually, is that going to make it to the trial? Like, will the grand jury see that?
The grand jury is going to see whatever Damian Williams wants it to see. And I don't think Damian Williams is going to let them see too much.
Wow. That is fascinating. So there was actual surveillance equipment found in P. Diddy's home.
Yeah. Those raids in LA and Miami, they basically came out with a bunch of computer stuff. They didn't, and here's the tell with that. Although those search warrants were executed in Miami and Los Angeles, they emanated from the Southern District of New York, Damian Williams. So Damian Williams, I mean, these lawsuits were just piling up. And someone had to do something about P. Diddy. So this is 2.5 months. This federal grand jury has been waiting for 2.5 months. It could have indicted P. Diddy on, I thought P. Diddy would get indicted and maybe a couple other guys, but I don't even know if P. Diddy's going to get indicted at this point.
But what would happen to him?
I mean, he'd be looking at years in prison.
Wow. So you don't think he'll be indicted at all?
I don't know, but it's that grand jury, that federal grand jury from the Southern District has waited for 2.5 months and there's been no indictments. And we also know that Damian Williams is dirty. So.
But if Diddy gets off clean and just walks away with nothing, I think that would look pretty, that would be too flagrant. That would just be too
I mean, one would think, but look at what Epstein got away with.
Yeah, but they had to take him out. They had to handle that.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. Someone like P. Diddy, and we'll get back to Epstein. I want to button that up as well. But now we're on the topic of P. Diddy. How does someone like that get involved in, doing these types of sex crimes? And then if what you're saying is true, that he was involved in some type of intelligence apparatus, how does that come about?
P. Diddy founded Bad Boy Records with Clive Davis. And Clive Davis is an interesting character. He has a long history of criminality, but he hasn't spent one day in jail. And I'll enunciate his various crimes.
Yeah. What type of criminality? A lot of times people in rap might be criminals.
He got busted for cheating on his taxes 3 times.
Okay.
And then there was also some kind of tax fraud. And he was part of the biggest payola scandal of all time. It was CBS Records was giving money to radio stations to play their records, which is against the law. And he was busted for, I guess, at that point, we're talking maybe the 70s, $250,000. It was the biggest payola scandal ever.
Wow. Okay.
But it gets even better with him.
Yeah. I mean, no jail time for that so far. I'm like, all right,
okay, so
tax fraud and whatever.
So tax fraud and, Al Capone was put away on tax fraud. I mean, if the government really wants to put you away, it'll put you. But there was a Genovese guy named Pasquale Falcone, and he got busted smuggling 22 pounds of heroin in the United States. So the feds started looking at Falcone, and then they came across these shell companies that Clive Davis and Falcone had set up. Falcone was siphoning money from CBS and putting them in these shell companies, and he was splitting the profits with this Genovese crime guy.
Oh, wow. So he was connected to mob crime.
So this is a guy that's heavily connected. Now, all that criminality that I just said, the dude has not spent a day in jail.
Was he ever convicted for any of these things?
No. He's made like settlements and things like that, but the feds have let him walk. I mean, all these things that I'm telling you about, these are federal laws that he's broken. And he started Bad Boy with P. Diddy in 1993.
And he's involved in music before this? He was
Yeah, he's been involved in music forever. There was a documentary that came out about him. He was this benign octogenarian. I mean, it was basically an infomercial. on Clive Davis.
I see.
He's a dirty guy. And I think that he took P. Diddy by the hand, and they both, Clive Davis was already on the yellow brick road. And then he took P. Diddy by the hand, and now they're both on the yellow brick road.
Now, what would be the benefit of having someone like P. Diddy as an asset? What information is he able to get, or who is he able to compromise?
The biggest people in sports, the biggest people in music. Kamala Harris has gone to his parties. I mean, there's a lot of political heavyweights that have hung out with P. Diddy, who's a thoroughly foul and reprehensible individual.
Yeah, absolutely.
But he used to have what he would call freak-off parties. He had like regular parties, but then he had what he called freak-off parties, where, they were essentially bacchanalian orgies.
Right. Yeah, I've heard about these before, and people have heard rumors about these types of things for years, and now it's kind of coming to light. And do you think that there's any benefit in having any type of extortion material on athletes and musicians and things like that? And what would you do with that type of extortion?
Okay, think about the power that athletes and musicians have. Let's say a bunch of athletes got together and said, or a bunch of musicians got together and said, we really want to get to the bottom of Jeffrey Epstein. Then that would put a tremendous amount of pressure on the government.
Or maybe political influence, or, saying we're going to vote for this person.
Yes, all the above.
That makes sense. Interesting.
So, because in our society, people in showbiz have millions of Twitter followers. I mean, people follow them. People will follow them to hell. Mm-hmm. That's just where our society is.
Interesting. So he's able to have these lavish parties where he's able to invite everyone. It's not only political heavyweights. He's able to get the entire, spectrum of entertainers and influencers.
Look at Taylor Swift. She came out and said she was voting for Kamala Harris. And look at how many people are going to vote for Kamala Harris because Taylor Swift does? And look at Twitter and how, the Trumpkins are treating her.
Yeah. And it seems like her endorsement did, spur a lot of like younger voters to actually register.
Yeah.
And again, not to suggest that she has, extortion material or some type of blackmail against her, but just as an illustration of the power of individuals.
Yeah. The power that celebrities have in our culture.
And I guess this is something I've been thinking about, that as social media has kind of democratized the celebrity process, maybe in the 80s and 90s, if you wanted to become a celebrity and have a ton of influence over the culture, you'd have to go through some type of record label or some type of, executives. And they have some control over you. They control whether or not you go on TV. They control your records. They control how much music you make. They control your finances. So there are a specific group of people that can now control people. But now that it's more democratized and anyone can get famous and anyone can build up a following, that poses a big risk to power. And the power structures that be, whether it's political or financial, economic, etc., they're not able to control these independent influencers to the same degree. So what can they do? They can basically create schemes to then blackmail them in some other way. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, I mean,
purely speculative, but
I think you're right on it, because as I said, celebrities have unbelievable power in our culture,
and decentralized now more than
and I mean, they can tweet something and it'll go to 5 million people.
Interesting. So is it possible that Diddy gets some type of deal and just gets to walk away and never be seen again? Or do you think he's a flight risk or a whistleblowing risk?
No, but here's the thing with Diddy. The dude has 8 sexual assault lawsuits pending against him. Mm-hmm. 2 of them are minors who he treated pretty brutally, according to these lawsuits. He's already settled one. The Little Rod lawsuit talks about multiple minors. And that grand jury has been waiting for 2.5 months. I mean, all you'd really have to do is call a couple of those minors in Little Rod, and you've got indictments for child trafficking.
Do you know if any of the victims are claiming that other people were involved?
Well, Little Rod certainly is.
He's saying that other entertainers and athletes and politicians.
Yeah, Little Rod says that there is.
Oh, wow.
So,
it's going to be very interesting to see what happens. I'm curious, the footage that came out of his domestic abuse against his then girlfriend, Cassie.
Yeah.
Do you think that was coordinated, or do you think that was a legitimate leak that happened through the hotel? Because he had paid initially to have that footage effectively deleted or destroyed, and then it resurfaces. And I'm curious if you think that that's an organic thing, or if that's somehow organized to kind of paint him as an individual who's deranged.
I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
Yeah, it's suspect, the timing, but also there's a lot of money in it right now, so it makes sense. As someone,
I mean, if you had, was it released through TMZ or?
I think so. I can't say.
I mean, they'd be willing to pay a lot of money for P Diddy beating up a woman.
Right. So an individual could have just gotten money from it. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, the P Diddy story is bizarre. It's curious to see what happens. And with Epstein, I'm curious with anything that's going on with that. I know the case is technically closed, but if you request information, it's still ongoing. Is there any documents in court that have been verified that he was working as an asset, or is that still speculative based off of the reports of the victims?
I don't think it's speculative. I think it's a reality.
Mm-hmm.
One of the big things that I believe is happening with the Epstein case is myself and Alicia Owen. Alicia Owen is the girl that
from the Franklin scandal
that did 9 to 15 and was given 9 to 15 and spent 2 years inside. She's an associate director. I'm the director of Epstein Justice. And we have we've got a petition it's coming up on 45,000 signatures. We've got a website, epsteinjustice.com, and we're starting to put on Epstein Justice forums. We just had one in Iowa. We wanted to start in the Midwest, and the next one is going to be in Houston. And what we're doing is we're building an infrastructure, because we cannot let our government traffic children with impunity. We cannot let, if you are covering up a crime, you are aiding and abetting that crime. Our government has covered up child trafficking. I mean, our government, that's the worst crime possible, is child trafficking. Our government has covered that up, and that is, in legalese, aiding and abetting. So we've got a government right now that's covered up child trafficking, that's aided and abetted child trafficking. It's gone through Bush, it's gone through Obama, it's gone through Trump, and it's gone through Biden. And as Americans, we have to, the government has to come clean on this. And we want a commission, an Epstein Justice Commission, that we have two simple demands. One, we want to know why the government is aiding and abetting child trafficking. And two, we want the perpetrators to be prosecuted. And what I also believe is that if you start drilling at Epstein, you will come across the cesspool that is our government. You know what our congressional approval rating is right now?
Very low, I imagine.
It's 13%.
Wow.
So that means that 87% of Americans don't believe that the government is working on their behalf. And why is that? And I believe it's because there are so many politicians that are compromised. You end up with when you end up with such a compromised political situation like ours, environment, you end up with Trump running against Joe Biden.
Right.
You end up with, I mean, that's what happens.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like our best two options.
Trump I mean, there's so many good people on the left that are smart and intelligent and moral. There's a lot of good people on the right that are smart, intelligent, and moral. How do we end up with a guy who's got late stage Alzheimer's and Donald Trump?
Right. Yeah, it is a curious question. And I guess my suspicion is that the only way to rise to these ranks of power is if there's
Compromising helps. Yes.
I kind of come from this point of view that if you have power currently, why would you give power to someone else without some type of means to rein them in? Whether it's through physical violence, whether it's through, financial compensation and bribery, or through blackmail. I think it could be any of the above.
It's the yacht.
Yeah.
Everybody's on the yacht. When you think about how much evidence there is in the Epstein case, and only one person has gone to prison for that.
Yeah, I mean, it's very clear, and this is not speculative at all, that he was pandering young women to dozens of people, at least.
Dozens.
And Prince Andrew kind of gets wrapped up into it. Like, he's someone that's faced, at least social consequences. That's basically it, right? I mean, Ghislaine, has anyone else?
Nobody. And we know who a lot of the procurers are. We know who a lot of the perpetrators are.
And is there any official reason why these other people have not been prosecuted? Like, is there a reason that the Department of Justice gives, or
No one is. And the media really needs to hold their feet to the fire. The Department of Justice, but nobody in the media is doing that.
And that just seems. I would expect that they would give at least some reason, like, oh, we are continuing to investigate, or, oh, we are doing something. The fact that there's no explanation seems bizarre to me.
And that's why Epstein Justice is so important. We need to congeal.
Mm-hmm.
And as Americans, we need to, not only do these shops have to go to prison, we got to make sure that our government no longer aids and abets child trafficking. And I think that once we start going down that road, we'll see how perfidious the system is with blackmail.
Yeah, and furthermore, not only aiding and abetting this cover up, but furthermore, if they are using these people as assets for blackmail, stopping that behavior seems paramount.
Well, we have to do that.
Mm-hmm. Like, just go back to bribery. Just bribe people.
It's only going to get worse.
Right.
And the wealth polarization. The rich are getting richer, the poor are getting poorer. There are parts of the United States that are third world.
Yeah. Have you ever spoken to the prison guards? There are 2 prison guards that faced, I guess, some type of criminal action for their negligence in protecting and monitoring Jeffrey Epstein while he was in prison before.
Nothing happened to them.
But I guess they went to court or something.
Yeah, but nothing happened to them. And actually, the warden has got a cush job in New Jersey now.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Have you spoken to them? Have you reached out to them at all?
No.
I would be curious to know what they say.
They're not going to say much. I think who I'd really like to talk to is that judge who initially had Epstein's case.
That got it removed from him in South Florida?
No. The judge in New York where her husband and son were shot.
Yes. Can you explain that story? That's very bizarre.
Her husband and this judge was overseeing Epstein's case, and then a gunman came to their house and killed the husband and then the son.
And then what happened to her role in the case?
Well, then, of course, she gave it up.
And that gunman was never found.
Well, no, he ostensibly killed himself.
And was he connected to anyone? Do we know who he was?
No. Well, we don't know.
That's not public information.
Well, we don't know who he's connected to.
Did he just seem like does he have any connections to intelligence?
It's the lone nut kind of thing.
But there's no tacit connection that he knew people or that he had a meeting with someone. He just seemed like the story is that he was a crazed gunman.
Yeah.
Is there any other official story that he was, had some type of grudge against this judge or something?
There might have been, but not that I know of.
Have you reached out to the judge?
Well, here's the thing with that. I can get just about anybody's phone number. But she wrote an article saying that it's truly unfortunate that people like her, that other people can have access to their addresses.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt like writing her a letter. I don't want to call her. I mean, she's lost her husband and her son. I don't want to. But I'd really like to talk to her.
What would you ask her?
I'd like to ask her what she was doing, how she was handling the Epstein case and the discovery.
Interesting.
I mean, that's what I'd like to know.
Yeah.
That's the big enigma, one of the big enigmas here. I mean, we know who the procurers are. The New York Times wrote an article on 6 or 7 of them, and we know who a bunch of the perps are because of Virginia Giuffre's lawsuit. But I'd like to know what that judge did, how she was going to handle the Epstein case.
Have any intimidation been brought upon any of the victims from Epstein? Have they spoken about any type of coercion or, I guess, intimidation?
Okay, so there's the Epstein Victims Compensation Fund that was set up, and only 225 women have come forward. Now, I've been told that a lot of them are very frightened to come forward. There's been 150 settlements, but 8 have declined settlements. So there's been 142 women that have been. But if you get money from that fund, you sign an NDA and you can't talk about any of your other perps. And that's really tragic because that's how victims get better, is by talking about, their abuse. And they should have they should be able to sue their other perps. David Boies is the attorney that's overseeing. Jordana Feldman, who was she was part of the Epstein victim or the 9/11 Victims Compensation Fund. Her and David Boies have put together this Victims Compensation Fund. We don't know what the criteria is for why some are getting settlements and why some aren't.
Interesting.
And I know 2 therapists, and one of them, she's a psychologist. She's a very famous psychologist. She has a client who says that she was under 10 when she was trafficked by Epstein, and she's able to provide details of Epstein's home and other parts of the neighborhood. And she helped her client apply for the Victims Compensation Fund. And I know another therapist who had a client who was under 10 years old when she was trafficked by Epstein. And they were both turned down. And they feel that they were turned down because the cover story is that there weren't any girls younger than 14 that were by Epstein. But Lawrence King, he was into pubescent boys, but if you wanted a 7-year-old or an 8-year-old, he'd get you a 7-year-old or an 8-year-old. I think the same thing is true with Epstein. He's a psychopath. These guys are psychopaths. I mean, it's not like they've got a moral barometer that said, well, this is a 10-year-old, and these guys are psychopaths. If one of their clients wants a 10-year-old, they'll give him a 10-year-old. And these guys get violent too. I mean, I know of at least one case where a very high-ranking politician put one of these girls in the hospital. Really? That's his thing, getting violent with young girls.
That's brutal.
Epstein would serve those girls on a silver platter, and yet this one guy had to get violent.
Wow. I mean, yeah, it's just deplorable. I'm curious, do you think I think I know your answer. Are there other Epsteins out there? Not clones, but are there other Epstein types that are doing this stuff now?
Have your listeners or viewers read a book called The Snow Killings. And that's about Francis Sheldon. There was a huge network in Detroit. I've done a podcast, actually 2 podcasts on it, and I've written about it too. There was Fox Island. They would fly these kids to this island and then use them for child pornography. And we saw this in Franklin. We saw this with Epstein. Some of these guys get increasingly violent. And there were 4 kids that were murdered and then dumped by the road. And it was pinned on this guy named Christopher Bush, who ostensibly killed himself. But the suicide scene is so staged, it's actually kind of humorous. But there have been a number of that had been given lie detector tests that had pre-knowledge of those murders. And then one guy was connected to one of the victims through mitochondrial DNA. But none of them have been prosecuted for the deaths of those 4 kids.
And it makes you wonder why none of them were prosecuted.
And this was another network. There was a task force that was formed to find the killers of those 4 kids, and they didn't make one arrest. I mean,
now is your general thought experiment with this, if there is a network that is proven and no justice comes from it, that it is in some way connected to some type of scheme or some type of higher power. And then if there's an organization that does get busted, it either served its purpose or it's not connected. Is that like a fair categorization?
I think that's a reasonable assessment. The Keepers, that was kind of a hit.
Netflix doc.
Yeah. I mean, none of those went down. And they were obviously hooked up to at least the police.
Interesting. Because I spoke with a gentleman named Bob Hamer. He was an undercover FBI detective who took down, I think, 8 to 10 members of NAMBLA. And he operated a sting organization or operation, went undercover, joined the group, identified who the people were, and then set them up in basically a child trafficking sting and got these guys arrested. So on the one hand, it's like, oh, wow, our government is working as it should. It's protecting the vulnerable. It's finding people that are really doing wrong and doing evil and taking care of them. But then on the other hand, if they're connected to some type of intelligence or blackmail, then they probably will not see justice in the same way.
I mean, we've got Epstein, we've got Franklin, we've got the Keepers, we've got Fox Island and Francis Sheldon. It goes on and on and on.
Was the Fox Island case connected to politicians as well?
A lot of big shots, and it was huge. One of the actually made a flow chart of it, which is on my website, and it's huge. I mean, they were creating shell companies and things like that it's mind-boggling.
Wow. I mean, at this point, with all of your research, could you put a percentage on how many politicians you think are compromised?
Some of them are compromised and some of them are willing to make a Faustian pact. Some of people really want power.
Yeah.
And are willing to do just about anything for power.
Do you think there's any of them that know if I want to achieve what I want to do politically, I have to give them blackmail? Like, I wonder if there's any of them that do it they're almost coerced to do things, if that makes sense.
I don't know. As I said, our politicians have a potent psychological alchemy of lust and arrogance. And when you combine those two, smart people become very stupid. And then there's a lot of people, like with the Franklin scandal, there's some like the Douglas County assistant prosecutor in the Alicia Owen case, because Alicia had to be found guilty so it could sanctify the grand juries,
right?
That no children had been abused. So he immediately became a Douglas County court judge. And then her next prosecutor became a U.S. attorney. And the U.S. magistrate that covered it up, he became a U.S. District Court, federal court judge. And then the other U.S. attorney that covered it up, he became a magistrate. So they just keep getting bumped up. And I think that some of them might be, but some of them just want more power.
And do you think this happens in every country?
Of course.
It's just the nature of power.
I mean, we saw what happened in the UK, Belgium with Dutroux, Portugal. I mean, yeah. The thing about it is, exist in all social strata. But the ones that we're talking about children with impunity.
Right.
And that's the difference. Guys that are trafficking kids in trailer parks are going to do 20 to 30 years.
Yeah.
But these guys, and we know who they are. We know who a lot of them are. They're never going to do time unless we can, make our children a priority. And that's the other thing with this. There's, according to the Centers for Disease Control, and these are conservative numbers, 25% of American girls have been underage American girls and 5% of American boys. That's 50 million people. So that's 50 million Americans that have been. Now, we're not going to be able to stop all the, because a lot of them are incest. But then of those 50 million Americans, I'm sure a lot of them have been trafficked.
Yeah, and it doesn't seem like there's any type of explicit attempt to stop or prosecute the high-ranking ones. Now, you had mentioned with the Franklin scandal that, you're not afraid that these guys are going to come after you. Now, you're talking now about people like P Diddy, people like Jeffrey Epstein and his accomplices. Are you concerned about your safety when it comes to talking about these people and exposing what they've done?
No, I had a death threat in 2002, and I've had a lot of strange phone calls, and there's been some other stuff too. Here was my thinking about it. I thought to myself, when I realized, the first time I went to Omaha, I knew that something had gone down, but I didn't think I was going to come across what I came across. I mean, I didn't think it was as big and evil as it was, and that it was hooked up with intelligence and Boys Town and all that stuff. I was pretty stunned by that. And I don't have a wife and I don't have children. And I decided that this is just too evil. I've got to do something about this. If I can do something about this, I've got to do something about it. So that has been the war that I have waged for 22 years.
Wow. I mean, it's admirable. You've mentioned that you got calls from intelligence.
No, I've gotten strange calls. I didn't say calls from intelligence.
That's fair. Have you ever gotten calls that you suspect were some type of, governmental organization?
I've been talking to a politician once, and my line went dead, and then all of a sudden there was heavy breathing on it. So I've had stuff like that.
Strange. Very strange.
And I could get into other examples, but people would think I'm crazy, so I'm not going to.
That's fair. Yeah, it's very disturbing. I mean, I'm partially concerned. You know what I mean? Just having the conversation, it makes me a little freaked out. I personally don't think any of these people were blackmailing anyone, and no one was intelligence. And I believe the official story. Okay, anyone that's watching, I'm not as brave as you. I don't know about all this stuff. Okay. I think Epstein could just die in a cell peacefully in his sleep or whatever.
Yeah, no doubt about it. No doubt about it.
Just to conclude, that's how I feel about it.
Yeah.
You're free to believe whatever you'd like. And anyone listening can draw their own conclusions. But I really appreciate you coming on and sharing all this information. Yeah, this is really interesting. Thank you for laying out all the details and explaining, what's in the official story, what your research has covered, and then what you think outside of that. I think was really informative, and I think the audience will have a lot to consider. So. Thank you, Nick.
Thank
Bryant.
you.
If people are interested in finding you, you have a great podcast. They can find even more information on these types of stories.
I'll give you links.
Yeah.
And then you can post them.
And then excellent books, Franklin Scandal, Confessions of a DC Madam.
The Truth About Watergate.
Truth About Watergate. Yeah,
that's my latest.
Yeah. That was I got to read that. I haven't read it.
Yeah, it's an interesting book.
Absolutely. Maybe you come back on. We can discuss that.
At the heart of Watergate is the CIA sexual honey trap. So.
Same. Is similar to kind of what we've been discussing?
Yeah. Yeah, at the heart of Watergate.
Against Nixon?
No, it was the Democratic National Committee was on the 6th floor of the Watergate building. And if you went to the 6th floor, there was a Secretary Maxie Wells, And if you were a big shot, she'd provide you with photos of prostitutes who were at the Columbia Plaza, which were high-scale apartments about a block away from the Watergate. And there was 2 break-ins to the Democratic National Committee. The second one of the burglars had the key to that desk, to that drawer, and their photograph equipment was set up on her desk.
Interesting.
So
this is a great teaser for our next episode on Watergate. This would be a lot of fun. Nick, Bryant, thank you again. Let's do this again soon, brother. Thank you for doing this.
Absolutely.